Welcome, folks. We have a bunch of people rolling in here. And all right. So there will probably be people popping in, but it is 11 o'clock and we are ready to get started here with the conversation. So grateful for all of you and your time, your attention, your participation, hopefully even. For those of you who have not been with us before, our eConnect series, Conversations with Coatesville, we are often having conversations with Coatesville residents, professionals around issues that are important to Coatesvillians, but also these are issues that are important to Pennsylvanians and Americans across the board. So we're grateful for those of you who are directly in and connected to Coatesville for your attendance here, but also those of you who just saw this on social media and said, hey, that's a free conversation I'd like to spend my lunch hour with. So thank you so much, each and every one of you, for being here. Also, a thank you for those of you who are catching this on the recording. I know that some of you are not able to attend in the moment, but glad for you to be a part of this, even if it's at a later time. Now, for those of you who are part of the recording, obviously you won't be able to put in those questions. Just for future reference, though, remember that when we have registration, we do allow people to put questions in during the registration period, so you may be able to hear your question addressed even if you can't attend it live. That, of course, being for future conversations. For this conversation, for those of you who are part of it, please feel free to be a part of this conversation through the Q&A function at the top of your screen. The goal here is that we are having a conversation with individuals doing this work day to day, doing this work, wrestling with these ideas and issues, but also that you're able to be at least some of that conversation through the responsiveness within that chat. And so we're going to get this conversation going. I'm going to introduce myself, the talking head here, and then we will introduce around the horn here. So I am Kevin Ressler. I'm the president and CEO for the Alliance for Health Equity. I am an individual who also has done some work within education spaces. I serve on an education foundation board and have for a number of years. I've done some other work within education spheres. Of course, I have my own educational background. It is not education connected. I have a peace and conflict studies undergraduate, theater undergraduate, and then for master's, I have a master's of divinity. So I have some education, but I'm not on the practitioner side of that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to look at my screen and go around the loop. So Steve, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having us in on this discussion. My name is Steve Wilson. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit based out of Coatesville here, called the Educational Equity Alliance. I was a teacher, continuing educator, taught early in my career. I have an undergrad in art, if you believe that, and then have a master's in teaching as well. So spent most of my career in nonprofit educational work. So that's what brings me here today.
Thanks. Go ahead, Allie.
Hi, everyone. Allie Caccavella. I currently serve as the special advisor to the Deputy Secretary in the Office of Higher Education and Post-Secondary here at the Pennsylvania Department of Ed. That is a mouthful. I am Pennsylvania born and bred. I was born and raised in Bucks County, and then had briefly worked as a teacher. My first teaching was here in Philly, well, not here, but where I currently live and am raising my kids. West Philly is best, so in case you didn't know. We are I have worked as a teacher in Philly School District for many years, and moved pretty swiftly into post-secondary access and affordability work. So worked as a financial aid advisor, working in schools and training other practitioners in the post-secondary access space to leverage affordable resources to make post-secondary pathways more affordable, and then moved into policy and advocacy, recognizing there are way too many hurdles and hoops in front of our learners and parents and families and communities to access affordable post-secondary pathways. So I worked in the federal policy advocacy space, working to advance and simplify and increase access to financial aid, and just higher ed writ large. And now I am so glad to work for the state and pretty grateful to work for a state right now. And given everything that's happening in the higher education and just education landscape, for a governor and administration that actually really believes in education and is continuing to invest in first of its kind infrastructure in Pennsylvania for higher ed in particular. I also did some research. I worked at institutions, particularly focusing on the affordability crisis that leads to basic needs insecurity. So that work is also really near and dear to my heart. And I know a lot of the mission that the Alliance for Health Equity offers in terms of the social determinants of health. So I'm so happy to be here with you, Coatesville area folks. I was saying one of my favorite teachers was from Coatesville School District, who really helped inform and influence my path. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining this conversation. And last but not least, Dr. Miles.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vincent Miles. I'm the founder and director of the Dream Big Academy, which is a mentoring and youth development program for young boys within the Coatesville community. A lot of my background is in higher education. I'm a senior faculty member at two different a college and a university. I teach in the social and behavioral sciences. Prior to doing that, I've worked throughout the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems, and from diagnostics all the way through to confinement and, just a number of different areas. But I'm on here today just as a Coatesville resident that's interested in seeing change within our educational system and to see how it would benefit those that are in great need within our community, understanding the literacy gap that exists. So that's me in a nutshell. That's my background.
Thank you. Thank you each. I also popped in and looked at the registration, and there's a lot of folks here with a lot of varied backgrounds, and we appreciate the different things that you bring. Just a reminder for those of you who have joined a little bit later that the chat Q&A functions are there. I did invite people in the chat to put your name and your contact information if that's something that you would like to share. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions here just to get us warmed up a little bit, and then we're going to make sure we get to some of these pre-submitted questions. There's some spicy questions that were asked from the community. Education is obviously a hot topic right now. Education, and I'll say it, is under assault from the federal government as they're looking to end the Department of Education. As an individual who was identified gifted, who has children who are identified gifted, which falls under special needs, that special needs continuum from learning support to identify gifted individuals, funding for that comes through some of these things that are looking at being cut. The realities for school districts like the Coatesville Area School District. Steve, I know that you are not representing the board here for Coatesville School District, but you are vice president of the board there. And so the funding challenges that schools have that are in areas that have a lower property values, which of course funds the schools in Pennsylvania through property values, but as well as schools like Coatesville Area School District that have a lot of charter schools. There's a lot of different ways that we already have been siphoning money away from public schools, and the voucher system and some of these things we'll be looking at that. So we'll talk about some of that, talk about some book bans, talk about some concerns about DEI. But let's start up earlier. Let's start earlier in this conversation. I want to ask a question about, education that we have here is more than just what you're learning to read and write. It is a place where social acuity is developed, and it also is a place where a lot of needs show up. I'd be curious, any of you wants to jump in here and talk about how food insecurity, housing instability, transportation barriers, these things, how do these influence the student's ability to succeed? Beyond just is the teacher a good teacher, what's that ecosystem look like, and what are some of the challenges that you've experienced or seen for families who maybe are less resourced?
Food insecurity is definitely a major challenge. It's difficult to learn when you're hungry. And I always say it's imperative for faculty to understand the demographic in which they're teaching, because sometimes it's almost like if you have someone coming from from Beverly Hills coming into Coatesville, they may not be able to identify with the culture that exists within in the area. So I think housing has a lot to do with it too, especially for our homeless youth that may not have a permanent resident, which means that they may need transportation to get to the school that they're in. So there's not too much disruption in the educational process. But living within this area, we're going to see those dynamics existing. So it's imperative that educators be aware of the population which they're serving if you want to see them successful. And there are so many solutions that can come to mind, but that's something I believe we'll talk about later.
Steve, I'd be curious your thoughts, because your organization, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about your organization. You're providing outside of school support, and sort of what does it look like to serve in a community and serve individuals whose resource needs are beyond just the textbook and the teacher?
Yeah, so just to give a little framework, part of what we do in the Education Equity Alliance is establish or help improve nonprofits working in out of school educational environments. So whether it's preschools, after school, tutoring services, and specifically in Coatesville, I think one of the things that we often see and lean into with students is just health and well-being and their experience. And Dr. Miles, you alluded to this, referencing Beverly Hills versus Coatesville. When we're working with students in Coatesville and their families outside of school, what we're constantly looking at is how are those students engaging in our nonprofit spaces compared to the public school system? And to get more granular, what I'm referencing or referring to is predominantly Black and Brown students. In our nonprofit kind of sector, we're looking to ensure that we have tutors, volunteers that are that look like and have similar experiences to those students. And I think sometimes that's underscored or not emphasized enough. When we look at our public school system, Coatesville itself has only about 7 to 8% staff teachers of color. So we're looking at student engagement, student sense of belonging, health, well-being, psychologically safe environments. One of the things, Kevin, to answer your question, that I think we don't emphasize enough is that sense of belonging for students deeply impacts student outcomes and their ability to achieve in spaces. So I think in the nonprofit, as we're working with students outside of school, I know a number of executive directors in Coatesville that are constantly working on that dynamic to ensure that these students have a strong sense of belonging. And we see academic performance increase when that's present.
Yeah, I'll tell a real quick anecdotal story. So I went to a school district in Lancaster County, public school, kindergarten through 12, same school district. I never changed a building. I was in the same elementary school the whole way through. Very stable, right? I remember having a friend, really good at basketball, African-American Black student like me, really good at basketball, loved playing basketball. And one day, one of the teachers, I remember having a conversation with him, said, most people aren't going to become professional in basketball. You need to buckle down in your studies and you need to be more serious. Why don't you think about a career that you could study for that's more likely to be able to be something you can achieve, like being a teacher or something? Well, from kindergarten through 12th grade, there was not a single non-white teacher in any building I was ever in. So the actuality of it is that kid had more of a possibility of being an NBA player than getting hired as a teacher in that public school system. So while we want to pretend that, though, you shouldn't be doing these hoop dreams or whatever, when all the teachers in the room are white, to tell a Black student and say, you should make a realistic life decision and you should try to become a teacher is actually a falsity. The kid is literally more likely to get a college scholarship, which he won't get, but still more likely to, or play in the NBA, which won't happen, still more likely to happen for him than to become a teacher in these public schools that aren't hiring individuals of color. So, Steve, you also, go ahead. I was going to pivot for you, but go ahead if you have something to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I just on the basic needs question. So, I mean, first to acknowledge that the educator teacher pipeline, there's so many excellent folks, certainly in Philly. And I know it's, more national, but really working to improve the demographics of our teachers, to particularly ensure that we have more representation. Center for Black Educator Development, I'm sure you are all well aware, had the great opportunity to get to work with Sharif El-Mekki and his team when working in Philly schools. And so that movement is so essential. But I do, on the crisis of basic needs and security, I will say for higher ed, we know it doesn't end when students, doesn't miraculously end when students enter a post-secondary pathway. In fact, the more recent data shows that roughly 3 in 5 post-secondary enrolled students are facing some form of basic needs insecurity, typically food and or housing, which we know is untenable. As Dr. Miles said, we can't learn and succeed when we are facing unsure where our students are going to sleep or where their next meal is coming from. So there's been a lot more attention, policy attention. I wish there was more resources. But certainly a mobilization of resources nationally and in Pennsylvania. And I'm just going to put in the chat, it is a particular collegiate basic needs initiative called PA Empower You. It's been recently rebranded from an earlier name, but essentially represents programs and practitioners across the state working in post-secondary institutions who are supporting specifically the various basic needs insecurities that we see our students, including also mental health was raised. We have more mental health initiatives and focus to support our post-secondary learners. As we know that the transition, particularly for younger people and adolescents, can be really triggering for mental health crises. So more to come there, but I do want to recognize, yes, it's an increasing challenge. And we know, particularly folks who are parenting or juggling other responsibilities, our learners of color tend to, face disparate percentages of basic needs insecurity. And it is an ongoing issue and crisis that we need to address if we're going to ensure that successful career and support and post-secondary credential completion that we know our state really needs. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, so all three of you have danced around this conversation around families, and I want to ask this question specifically about how do we ensure families are included in the conversations, the solutions around the well-being, around the needs, whether it's the basic needs outside of school or whether it's actually the supports within schools. How do we think about including the parents inside of that conversation? I think personally it's a little bit of a juggling act, right? Because you still want to understand that the educators are the experts and the educators and the administrators are the experts. So you can't get to a place where you're just trying to play whack-a-mole and respond to each individual parental request or need, but we also have to incorporate the realities of what people are needing and stating that they need in there. So I'm just curious how we get that family engagement as part of this process. Or we don't have an answer for that.
I mean, I can certainly speak to the higher ed side, but again, if you're talking K to 12, I will wait for my comment.
Well, no, either way, what's it look like on the higher ed side? Because higher ed's a little different because you've got transition, you've got a kid for the first time having a lot of independence. And, I remember when I went to college, it was different than about 10 years later. I had a conversation with someone who was working at the college I went to and was like, and had gone with me and said, Kevin, it's so different now. These parents, literally the kids call home to check in at night before they go to bed. Like it was the helicopter parent became a very different transition. So what does that look like today, Allie, that parental involvement at the college level?
So we really think about it. I mean, when you're talking from a state government or a policymaking lens, we're really talking about where are we engaging the constituents and the practitioners who are experiencing the insecurity or the need, and what are their learnings, because they're the experts in that experience, right? So how are we engaging our students, and sometimes they're parents, right? Or sometimes they're independent, but you're absolutely right. There does become, depending on the age, and we know that the majority of post-secondary enrolled residents are no longer your traditional kind of high school graduate anymore, right? It's more so adults who are working and caretaking and able, as they're pursuing a career and a family sustaining wage, and sometimes that includes post-secondary education. So it's really about where we're constantly thinking, considering, and developing opportunities to be engaging not only students but practitioners who understand the experiences the best, right? To identify what the obstacles are and what solutions are going to be the most supportive toward their success. So, for example, we engage in a partnership with the Department of Human Services and the Department of Education, particularly focused on parenting enrolled post-secondary learners and the obstacles that they face, and that they're going to continue to face, particularly as the federal government is cutting things like childcare on campus, and other programs that are going to be most impacted for folks who are juggling caretaking and work. So really trying to understand what is from them. We had a fellowship. It's really important that we're providing fellowship opportunities. We're paying students for their time and expertise so that they can help inform. And they basically drove the policy agenda coming out of what is now the Parent Pathways Program, which is a specific grant program to support parenting enrolled post-secondary learners across Pennsylvania campuses. Happy to share. I can drop that link in the chat as well, but I think it's a great example of where and how to meaningfully engage community members who are experiencing the policy challenge that we're looking to address.
So thank you, and I'm glad that that's an action that people can actually take. So when you drop that link, just so people know that's something they can actively engage with. Dr. Miles, your experience is vast in both the local setting and the collegiate setting. I'd be curious what you think about.
Well, in layman's terms, parents that are involved with these students during the first 2 semesters is critical. I found that the parents, I'm not saying as helicopter parents, but those that are involved, that communicate with their child or the student while they're in school during that major transitional process from high school to college, those students are more successful. When a child enters the campus, one of the first things that's done or said to them is, you are the adult, you will make the decisions. We cannot talk to your parents unless you sign a release in order to have access to talk about anything from financial aid to registering for classes or to determine what benefits that they're able to get or whatever it might be. So when you drop this child off and you put them in this setting, it's either sink or swim. Mm-hmm. And retention issues is something that is impacting a lot of these colleges and universities, especially for Black and brown kids that are in these schools. And not saying that the retention rates for Caucasian students are any different, but those parents that are involved, these students are a lot more successful. I see it all the time where students are lacking that parental guidance. And many of them, I mean, I could just think about the years I've been in higher ed. This is my 30th year in higher education. I've seen a lot of things within this process. And I found that those parents that want to call or text or email to learn about their students, we can't say anything to them unless there's a release form that says, okay, you can talk to, this person. So we have, before we can do anything, we have to look through all these different checklists to see, well, I can't talk to you about this. Well, maybe your child is failing 5 subjects, 4 out of the 5 that's on the schedule, but we can't say anything about that. But it's important that something's done in order to, if we want to increase the retention statistics, that something needs to be done at least during that freshman year, for them to be successful. And I've just seen a lot of transition, and a lot of these younger people now, in my opinion, feel a little entitled to the point that you have to do everything for them. For them to be successful. Utilizing the resources, and many of them will not use resources unless you tell them you need to go to X.
Yeah. So the other challenge that I know, we talked about Black and brown versus Caucasian disparities. Part of that is first generation, right? Regardless of race, right? But when the parent doesn't know some of these rules or these processes, or the parent wasn't ever in higher education themselves, so they're not as equipped to be able to support or run support or reach out or know that it's appropriate or not, whatever the case may be. When it's a first experience for your family, you just have a different awareness of what's available. Does education create that process? You know, here down the hall from me is the Newland Foundation, who gives a scholarship, and as part of their scholarship process, they're actually helping kids understand, like, here's how you do your FAFSA, here's what you do. And then they keep touching base with them, whether their parents are or are not touching base with them. What are ways that we as community can think about providing support, or what supports are there that we can know about that allow for individuals to feel support when their own family does not necessarily prioritize education or has not had that experience? And I think part of my frustration is how we need to move back towards thinking about the children in a community as all of our children, right? The comfort to pay your property taxes for education is not just a patriotic duty, it's also a community duty, right? And starting to think less about that student being an enemy because they're siphoning finances from me or whatever. How do we get back to, this is sort of a really ridiculous question to ask, but how do we get back as a society into a place where we see our mutual benefit when the success of the individual happens? Not sure if there's a specific enough question for anyone there, but
what comes to my mind as you share that is just community schooling models of how well can a local school district integrate itself with the community, so that, you know, you have attendance not only from middle class or upper class families, you have attendance from low to moderate income families as well. Here in Coatesville, you know, I know at a school district level, historically, a lot more middle class, a lot more white families attend whatever it might be, different meetings within the district. And there's always an effort to round that out so that there is community support, so that families, you know, lower income families, caregivers are attending meetings, are participating in the process. I think the more a district like Coatesville, for example, can not expect families to come to, but to go to families, the more impactful we're going to see healthy partnerships between nonprofit sector, between the public school, between families. One of the strengths, I think, of nonprofits, and there's a number, as we know, educational nonprofits in Coatesville, is those nonprofits have high levels typically of trust with community members, with families, with parents, with caregivers, a higher level of trust, if I'm to be candid, than historically our school district has. So that community partnership with like nonprofits, it gives a district in to gaining trust, to establishing healthier relationships, especially across race. When our district is predominantly kind of white Eurocentric, and we're working in a community that's predominantly, you know, African American community. So that's just, I think community partnerships is critical in that process.
I love the taking it to the individuals. I think one of the barriers may be time, maybe location, maybe transportation. So how do you actually migrate that? I also think that one of the things that we have is elementary schools in particular. You have more elementary schools than any other schools, and the elementary schools are closer to the individuals. So if you say, hey, everybody come to the high school, there's one high school, it's further for people to travel. If you start saying, you know what, we're going to run the program 3 times or 5 times or whatever, and take it to the elementary schools, you bring it closer to the people. So I really appreciate that perspective there, Steve. Are there other ways that we're thinking about eliminating these barriers that to inclusive education, to bringing people, student voice, parent voice? How are we reducing the barriers that exist in any of your sort of sectors?
Well, I think the community-based part of that, as Mr. Wilson said, I think that's important. But I also think that even with the community partnership, we are sort of missing one area that's in great need. And in my opinion, that's the Regency departments. I believe that for this area, there's a need up there for programming. And a lot of them are falling through the cracks. And even in places, maybe even in Hayti or other areas, because it's not between the bridges in order for folks to have access to it. And I think advertisement we can't leave out our churches, the faith-based organizations, in order to get the word out. This is what we're doing in terms of publicizing. This is what we have in the community. And, one of the barriers a lot of folks don't talk about would be connectivity and bandwidth. I don't see too many students bringing home books from school anymore. It's something that's kept in the school. And if you don't have the bandwidth or the connectivity in terms of internet in order in order to look at some of the different YouTube videos to help me understand how to break down trigonometry or these formulas in physics. If you don't have access to this type of thing, it sets you back. And then when it comes to after school programs, I don't know if we have any in this district, but if we did, it would be an issue of transportation on getting back home. The bus works, but then we got to also think about food security or insecurity, because if they're there, they have to be fed while they're there in order to get the help that is essential for them to be successful. And one thing that I've learned throughout my years is that once a child hits middle school, you know, at that point, it can basically determine the courses that they'll have in senior high school in terms of class rank, in order to qualify for the scholarships and to qualify for, you know, different classes that they'll need to go in. Just say if they wanted to be a marine biologist or whatever it might be, if you don't have that starting from middle school, if you're not on track there, it sort of sets you back and you got to play catch up. But if we don't have the proper bandwidth and a proper connectivity that we had, like say during COVID, where Comcast gave that discount for those to get online, and then you had the school laptop, which meant that you couldn't get on certain sites if you wanted to look at further research to help understand whatever it is that they're trying to learn. So there's a number of things I've mentioned in that, with community partnership, with connectivity and bandwidth, and also transportation and food insecurity and after school programs. You know, I think if we found a solution that ties in all of that, or even if it meant the Coatesville School District to do a partnership with Xfinity or AT&T or something like that to provide discounts to those in the school district, I think that could help get us to where we need to be.
No, absolutely. I think those are really great points. The future is digital. And, you know, we talk about screen time, we talk about all these types of things, but there's no question that the future is digital. And if people are not able to get comfortable, learn how to use it, there is a ceiling, as you said, with the technology that comes to the IT department of whatever school or other institution there is. You have their device as your only device, then you only have the access that they're allowing you to have. I want to pivot here a little bit, Allie. I want to go to you and ask about, because some of these things that Dr. Miles just talked about were funded on the federal level, and we know that the federal funding is going away. What is Pennsylvania's Department of Education looking at and doing in response to trying to fill gaps or solve some of the challenges that are absolutely going to come our way because of the reduction of federal support?
I mean, as you know, it's a massive, there's massive implications, and we're talking across every area from cradle to career. So, you know, I can tell you there's still a lot unknown, right? So particularly when it relates to higher ed. So we're really glad to see that the primary federal grants, notably what's called the Pell Grant, was pretty much preserved and expanded, and essentially to apply to short-term credentials. So those are known as workforce Pell, and that means that can apply to programs. And thankfully, these are accredited programs. There was conversation that they might not be accredited, which could really open it up to some bad actors who were looking to take advantage of these dollars on the backs of students and debt. But that's, you know, it's going to maintain, it will need to be accredited, and will need to actually have the backing of the governor. And the governor, thankfully, has been, as you all know, there's the Supreme Court case that had to, you know, under his charge to really equitably fund our school districts in the the school funding commission. That work is ongoing and continues. And for higher ed, we have a first of its kind Pennsylvania statewide coordinating entity called the State Board of Higher Education, which is I call it a policy baby. It's only 10 months old, but it is standing up and growing strong. And it is, coming into a landscape of Pennsylvania where our post-secondary opportunities have been some of the most unaffordable, and leaving our graduates with some of the highest debt in the country, which is obviously not tenable. And in a capital market, which we're all trying to exist and thrive, we're not only, not meeting the needs of our residents in our communities, but also losing the economic opportunities. So there is a massive effort, just not a moment too soon, as the federal system is falling down to really finally in Pennsylvania invest in post-secondary pathways, which all the data shows is the growing, and it doesn't need to be necessarily a 2 or even a 4-year degree. There are plenty of regions in Pennsylvania. And we looked at some of this data for Coatesville area when I met some of your team at the Newland Foundation convening, where what the particular needs are for post-secondary credentials in the Southeast region. So that work, I will say the state moved from second to last in terms of overall investment in post-secondary education, and that means direct appropriations and dollars to institutions, which we know ultimately goes to support students, right? That helps them meet their basic needs and ensure that the full human needs of our learners are met. And as well as financial aid, which, you talk about vouchers, essentially financial aid is a voucher for higher ed. So students can pretty much take that, and for state dollars, they can take that anywhere in Pennsylvania. We moved from 49th to 40th, so it's still not great, but we'll take that in a big year, and a lot more to come, as well as we have for the first time the ability here at the department to collect student level data on post-secondary outcomes of our students. We hadn't been able to do that. There is a ban on that. How can you make really good policy without that? So we're really glad now we're going to finally be able to see who are we serving, to what extent, and where are the gaps that we can prioritize otherwise really resource constrained environment. So that's a sample of some of what's to come. And, ultimately, the driving name is increasing access, including for our rural communities, our communities that don't have readily available Wi-Fi, and affordability. And affordability is a part of access, but it's not everything, right? It is a key piece. So looking to improve that ultimately so that we can get the credential attainment that we know is so essential for folks to get that family sustaining wage and economic mobility.
Thank you. I want to shift to Steve. I'm going to put you on the hot seat. I'm gonna shift to our first sort of spicy, we'll call it, pre-asked question here. One of the things that we see a lot of around this country are conversations around libraries, school libraries, book bans, these things. So I don't actually know exactly where Coatesville is within book banning and that kind of thing. And I know you're not a representative of the school. You're speaking for the school board, right? You are a member, so you're around these things. But can you talk to me about the specific question is, how do we reverse the banning of books? Not an option, but mandated, so that cultures are aware of the truth of Black history. So it's a question specifically around Black history. I don't know if Coatesville is banning any particular books, but I don't know what pressure you may be feeling around that, either in your day job or at the school board. But can you talk about this culture right now around book banning and how you all are approaching that in the various workspaces you're in?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know you just said this, but I'll just reiterate it. Anything I speak of regarding the district, I speak as an individual board member, not on behalf of the board or the district at large. And I need to say that. But with that being said, my personal viewpoint on that is, for me, I think it's critical that specifically African American history, and Coatesville did just approve and has, a new African American history course being taught at the high school level. I believe it's in honors or AP, but don't quote me on that. Additionally, I know, one of the questions I'm constantly asking in any spaces that I'm in, when we're looking at curriculum, whether it's specific to African American history or otherwise, is what are the books and the resource materials that our students are reading? Is it culturally responsive curriculum, and is it being provided with culturally responsive educators that are trained in that format? I think, I'll give you an example, just looking at one curriculum of late, and this isn't in the coastal district, just pulled one that had 10 books out of 12 books that were not written by authors of color. And so if you get into those books in that curriculum, you've got to ask yourself what protagonists, what antagonists are being shared, and do they relate with the readers that are sitting there before those books? If our student body cannot identify themselves within those stories, and specifically within the protagonists in those stories, then we have a challenge and we have issues, because our students need to be able to identify themselves within the stories they're reading. So I could go on, but I don't want to take too much time. I do at a district level, to my knowledge, we've not encountered a lot of challenges around book banning. Behind closed doors, of course, there is some and challenges there. But fortunately, Coatesville has not been targeted compared to other school districts that I've seen in the Chester County or further.
Thanks. Yeah, we do see less of the book banning things happening in the urban school districts across the state as opposed to the suburban and rural school districts. It seems to be more of an issue. Dr. Miles, I don't know if you have any thoughts around sort of the Black history, and you're at Thaddeus. One of the things that I appreciate about Thaddeus, I had a friend who used to teach there and taught English, and I was like, wait, what? I thought y'all are just hammers and nails, right? And then realizing, no, Thaddeus, which is 3 blocks from my house, right? Thaddeus, teaches a wide curriculum. It's using these technical colleges are not just the hammers and the nails, the welding and whatever. There's a lot of other education. Can you talk about, Dr. Miles, about what the educational encounter looks like when you say, don't choose to go a traditional 4-year college or a traditional associate's community college, and you go to this technical school? What is it that the education is looking like? What makes a well-rounded individual in your experience?
Well, first of all, thanks for asking that question. First of all, we have to remove the stigma on what technical colleges are all about. Before, it used to be a stigma of when you had a child that was going through something behaviorally, they would just say, let's send them down to Voltec so they can hammer something or destroy something or build something or whatever it might be. But I think it's imperative that we understand the learning style of the children that we're dealing with, even within this school district. And some people are the type of learners that need to touch things and move things. And not only do I teach at Thaddeus, I've been at Cheyney University longer. I'm still at both locations, but with techno education at Thaddeus Stevens, I always think about the 98% placement rate, which is amongst the top in the country. And we're dealing with, for those that actually graduate, they get jobs in their field, which is, if you compare that to the 4-year college and university, it's probably 3 times higher than these schools in terms of getting something in the field. So yes, we do have, you have to have your English, your math, your certain types of sciences, natural sciences, social sciences, and of course your there's different areas that you have to have for core courses, just like you would do at a 4-year college. You have your core courses that you have to have, your 2 Englishes and so on and so forth. But in terms of being well-rounded, sometimes you got to assess the need for the area in which people live in to see what's needed there. Like right now, where we don't have too many masons in the area that does concrete and things like that, and carpentry and your HVAC and things like that. And what I'm proud to say is that we've had a pretty good Coatesville presence over the last, I would say the last 11 years. We have a better Coatesville presence on the campus, but it's still important that they're at the right level coming in, because you have to have a certain level of proficiency with reading comprehension. And I think that's a key across the board. A lot of our children are not reading anymore.
Yeah.
And I think once we can do something to address that, I think it's going to hit everything where it needs to be, because for a great deal of what you do diagnostic wise when you're in the trades or you're in technology, it comes to reading and understanding basic math on how to solve certain problems and things like that. If you're dealing with a car, believe it or not, my first degree is in automotive technology. So I'm a
Mm.
mechanic, even though I did go further my education to get my doctorate in criminology. But the bottom line is, once we remove that stigma on technical education, then I think we'll do a lot better for at least this environment because there's a need in Coatesville to push towards that area. So I just think it's a matter of exposure. And that's what we do at the Dream Big Academy. We expose youth to what's out there, be it in the STEM areas or in technology. So I think I hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, it's a great answer. You also mentioned, because I didn't know that your doctorate was in criminology. My undergrad being in peace and conflict studies. You and I should get lunch and have a good conversation about how we think about things like restorative justice. And one of the questions we had pre-selected here was, have you considered student-run youth courts and time banking programs to provide protective factors to local youth? But I would like to have, because there was another I want to merge that with another comment I saw in the chat earlier about prison to pipe or student to prison pipeline elements, which we know, right? You mentioned middle school earlier. We know that at third grade reading levels, you mentioned reading levels. We know that for-profit prisons go into communities and see where their third grade reading levels are because it's a predictor of the level of future incarceration rates. How are we thinking about, right? So we're talking about higher education. There's a pipeline. How do we get people into higher education? How do we get people into traditional 4 years and into technical colleges? But also, how are we thinking about how we save the children for whom the system is intentionally designed to put them into negative spaces? How are we approaching behavioral issues? How are we approaching the systemic responses to struggle and failure? And are we punitive? And I'd love to hear what some of you all are thinking about and doing within to those spaces, because a lot of the negative behaviors that people do are influenced by the society around them and what options are provided when mistakes are made. And you talked about this a little bit, Dr. Miles, a couple minutes ago when you talked about technical college used to be a place that you went to send kids who were behavioral problems. And so, I'm curious what that looks like today, if it's no longer a place that we're saying, oh, I mean, because I remember when I was a kid, it was, if you were a dumb kid, you went to VOTEC. The dumb kids go to VOTEC. The smart kids stay in regular class. Less than behavior, but behavior was also a part of that. I don't think it's true. I don't think it was true then. I don't think it's true now. But I'd be curious how the VOTEC space pushes against those narratives and how it treats people with a better perspective as a whole human being.
Yeah. I think school to prison pipeline, I think part of the strategy towards that is where we're falling short is that we're intervening too late. I think intervention starts in elementary school in terms of behaviorally, in terms of making change. I think it's no longer in 7th, 8th grade anymore. That's too late now. Because a lot of people are set in their ways at that point. I think we need to intervene. You used to do prevention through DARE programs and things like that, but now that's too late to prevention. You're already at intervention stage. And we also got to think about what we've missed so far, as we haven't talked about the level of trauma that these young people are going through. I mean, we can look at food insecurity, we can look at housing insecurity, but we got to look at some of the different traumas that are affecting these children as well. And if you think about the Coatesville area, look at the murder rates so far just since school has been out in the Coatesville area. We've had a couple already within this area. And that's not only affecting the adult populations, these people that are murdered had children that are impacted by that. And we're not looking at some of the post traumatic stress that's impacting these individuals that go undiagnosed because there's still a stigma associated with getting treatment and counseling within certain communities. So it's imperative that we think about the trauma that's being overlooked. It's difficult to learn when you're hungry, when you're not sure where you're going to lay your head, and then you have to deal with certain things that you're taught to just man up and deal with. It'll get better rather than getting the help that's necessary. But if you don't get that help, the intervention stage, as I said before, is later when it should be an elementary level. to address these things. And then that comes in with, as Mr. Wilson said, where we're dealing with the community intervention strategies. We need more community health intervention strategies in some of these pockets in this area that's being overlooked. I mean, a lot of the discussion in this area has been based on the pools, swimming pools. But that has no bearing to me, especially when the children are not learning. Yeah, I think it's great for the children to learn recreationally how to swim and all of that rather than being in a fountain where you're just being sprinkled on. I think that's a good trait to have. But what's most important is the educational uh, uh, disparities that are existing within this community in itself and within these schools. We have elementary schools that are scoring high, but we also have those that are really struggling. When we look at our middle schools in this area, we see that there are challenges in our middle schools. And we look at our high school and our intermediate high school, there are challenges that some people don't want to go there. So we got to look at a lot more than what we've talked about on the surface. We got to look at some of the trauma.
Yeah. If I could just, I really appreciate what you just shared, Dr. Miles. And I would just add to that. I know within like Coatesville, looking at like MTSS, multi-tier system of supports, we're addressing students from a perspective of mental health and academic success, because those two are deeply entwined. I think partly, Dr. Miles, that's what you're alluding to, is the traumas that a lot of our students are facing are directly impacting their academic performance and how they behave in the educational system. I know Coatesville has about a year, maybe 18 months ago, don't quote me on the timeline, is shifting and has been shifting away from a more punitive discipline policy into more of a restorative policy with discipline. We're looking at the MTSSS, combining that with just how are we addressing student behaviors, not from a punitive sense, not, from a policing perspective, but from a kind of restorative process. And seeing that change begin in Coatesville is exciting to me, because like you said, most students that are acting out through traumas, through behaviors that they're bringing with them into the classroom. So seeing in a district level, seeing that at a cabinet level, seeing at a leadership level, seeing that at a principal, school level, teacher level, begin to roll out in the last 18 months more restorative practices in the discipline areas. That's been, I think, a fantastic shift. And in my opinion, long overdue, but it's nonetheless, it's exciting to see that that type of care for our students.
Yeah, I think it's also, you mentioned how we get earlier on the prevention, Dr. Miles. I think also we need to do a better job earlier on the identification. One of the things that I've looked at in the Coatesville area is the number of students who are identified as gifted in different schools, and there are disparities there. There are schools that have none. It's not possible to have an elementary school of hundreds of kids, and there's not a single kid who needs learning support when their learning style, because of a higher IQ or because of whatever, does not operate the same way as other students. And we know across the country that students of color are under-identified. And my own personal story for that was when I was in elementary school, me and my friends who got in trouble, all of a sudden I started getting detention and my friends got identified as gifted. If it wasn't for my parents intervening and having me tested and then being identified gifted, I probably wouldn't be here today. I probably would have been put on that to prison pipeline because I was being looked at for the color of my skin and an assumption of why I was acting out. And it wasn't that I was bored. It wasn't that I wasn't being challenged. It was that I was a behavioral problem. And so I think that as we think about what we're trying to prevent, part of that is by identifying and by being able to step in, whether it's at that freshman year or whether it's at that kindergarten year. A lot of parents do not have the same experience that their kids are going through. And the institutions have to be better about making sure they are proactive in identifying challenges and opportunities where parents may not know to intervene. It's not the fault of the parent for the lack of having that experience, but it is the obligation of the institution and the society at large to care for our children. And so I want to, in our interest of time, move us to final comments and just sort of open it up to each of you and whatever it is that you'd like to share. Finally, a word of encouragement, support, or just pontification. So we'll reverse where we went to before here. So Dr. Miles, you can go first.
Well, there was so much that you have just stated, and what you've just said, and identification is very important. I remember a scenario where, when we had the 3 middle schools, and I remember in the one middle school, they had students that were identified as being honor students, but when they were compared to the other schools, they were viewed as just average. But in their mind, they were thought of to be honor students. So when it came time for them to get into the 9-10 building after they got out of their middle school, they were not up to par because they were not being taught the same thing. So if you're both using the same trigonometry calculus book, and one school only gets to chapter 3 and the other schools get to chapter 14, and then you say, well, I got an A in calculus, but you've only been over X amount of chapters, then that's a challenge. And I think for us to be effective in this school district, there has to be an identification of a consistent curriculum that's across the board at each school. So it's not setting students up to believe that they're one thing and then they get there and sink and swim. And I find that out at the collegiate level as well. You have these honor students that are high ranking in their school, but once they get to college, it's just like, well, you're like barely average, So I think in this school district, it's imperative that, number one, that we increase the number of teachers of color that will be consistent with the ratio in this city or those that are in the school district. Secondly, I believe that the recruiting process should be inclusive of some of the HBCUs and recruiting for those that are from this city and to become teachers, maybe starting to identifying them maybe in high school and finding more scholarships to help them go through getting their elementary education degrees and secondary education degrees so that they have individuals that are actually they have like a certain commitment to this area because they've been through it. Then also we need to address, of course, things that we may not be able to address in the school system, which would be the food insecurity and the housing demographics. But I think the school can do something about some of the mental health stuff that causes trauma for that to be addressed. So I think, and the community-based element is very important too. So I can appreciate what you're doing in your program, Mr. Wilson, and some of the other programs that are here. But we just need to be more vigilant within some of these communities that are lacking supports that's falling through the cracks.
Thank you. Allie, I'll go to you.
Just looking at some of the comments in the chat and just concurring, that I think try to bring full circle. And my job here at the department is to really think about structural system level solutions, right? So how do we at scale support our students and our families who are recovering from trauma? Like, how do we allow, how do we disrupt those interruptions to their learning and opportunities at a system and a state level? And I think, starting with that note, just the work that Dr. Miles and Mr. Wilson do related to mentoring, as that a commenter made, it just takes one positive adult relationship in a young person's developing life to really be the difference. So thank you for those mentorship programs. They are essential and they support the parents, and the parents themselves are also very much sometimes encountering and recovering from trauma. And how do we not repeat? We allow those relationships, and we need more of those teachers, as you mentioned. So at the structural level, there are a lot of initiatives at the state to get more teachers in the pipeline and to provide a little bit of more financial support, particularly for teachers while they're teachers and school mental health counselors. We also have a new kind of repurposed Center for School Climate and Well-Being. It's been rephrased to really be more trauma informed, leading a lot of work across the state with our, 500 some LEAs across Pennsylvania. So continue to advocate in those spaces, I would say, as an action step, and really recognize that single adult relationship can really be the difference and the driver, and also the connector to a lot of resources. And those peer models where we can leverage our peers at all stages of development, teaching young people the kind of what's called social emotional, now it's called career ready skills, right? That those really become protective factors as they grow and develop, and help disrupt patterns of trauma, and support their peers. And it helps to address the stigma as well. When you're hearing from a peer and you're seeing and they're modeling self-advocacy, decision-making, conflict management, and, it just goes a long way. And we're also starting to now really try to leverage that without any additional resources in the higher ed space, but really focusing on mental health. So thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. And we'll wrap up here with Steve.
I think what's rolling in my mind right now, Kevin, you ended your part just on the gifted program, and I'm thinking of just how we've been speaking of the pipeline. I know currently in Coatesville, in our gifted program, just to give you an example, this is about a year and a half old data, but about 75% of our students in the gifted program are white students. Only about 5% are Black. I think Latina is around 8 or 9%. So don't quote me on that one. But you see the disparity. And when I think of community partners, when I think of like a pipeline within our district, on average, low-income students, which in our district is disproportionate number of Black and brown students, entering kindergarten are roughly 18 months behind their peers. So when we think of pipeline, 18 months behind peers at a kindergarten level, we need early childhood intervention. We need early childhood supports and testing to have, early childhood barriers broken for these students. When I think of the racial component, Dr. Miles, you brought up, some good studies out there. I think of one that says, if a student has two teachers, if a Black or brown student has two teachers that look like themselves, by third grade, they're 32% more likely to go to college. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable. The difference that kind of mentorship and leadership impacts a young learner, a young student. So yes, we have a lot of work to do specifically in the Coatesville district to better create an environment that is suitable for all learners, all styles of learners. And I think that's something that I'm passionate about. I think it's something that we're working on. I think it's something that needs community involvement and engagement. And Kevin, you mentioned that earlier. We need our community to be engaged in the learning process and influencing and shaping our district. I do think as a Coatesville district, as an executive director, I do think our district has, it's hard for me to say this objectively, but has made some great steps and is beginning to do a better job in some of these areas that we're touching on today. And I'm excited to see that continue. So just thank you. Thanks for the space this time, Kevin, for creating this for us and being a part of this. So.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you, the three of you, especially for your time, your expertise, your thoughts, your comments. Thank you, community, for being here. We are at time. The last thing I just simply want to say, because I just heard it from all three of you, is, folks, you can be involved. You have the opportunity to simply find one kid that you know and tell them how education helped you to be wherever you are. Whether that education stopped at 8th grade, graduating high school, having a PhD, whatever it is, just speak positively about education. We're so negative in our culture right now about education and book bans and anti this and anti that. Just tell kids that education is important and it matters, and everything that they see in you that they're proud of was supported by your ability to be educated. Education is a key to their future success. Thank you all. Go out there and change someone's life. Take care. Bye.